subscribe your own wave here. So I finally finished Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 2, Episode 28 of the entirety of Season 4. Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but yeah, I've basically finished the entirety. And now we're gonna wreck to the breakdown of a final episode. I'm gonna pause in between for opinion stuff. This video was made by Quirk, so subscribe to him and let's get started, I guess.
Since the rumbling began. During this episode, we got flashbacks to various things that happened while the scouts were undercover in Liberia. And today
Damn, this scene was insane. Like, this is obviously spoiler territory, so go watch it. What are you waiting for, man? But this scene where Eren just used that bullet and punched it through himself, so he still feels the same pain as every other person. He can regenerate it because of Titan powers, but he still feels the pain, man. And this is absolutely insane.
Including how Mikasa had the chance to stop Eren wiping out humanity.
Really? I think he would just do it. That was my Discord, I'm sorry, man.
Though, don't forget to colossal smash that sub button so
but yeah,
don't miss future
let's see what he's gonna say. And
as part 3 is confirmed to be coming out in 2023. This poster for part 3 was released online soon after the episode aired in Japan, and if I had to guess, I reckon next year we'll get around 8 or 9 brand new episodes that will finish off the series for good. I don't think there's going to be a part 4 for this season, but I mean, the way they've stretched it out over this many years, who knows, maybe there will be, but I highly doubt it. I think part 3 really is the end.
Yeah, it was also called like conclusion, and that is supposed to be the conclusion, I guess.
Anyhow, getting back to episode 28, the title for this one was The Dawn of Humanity, and it begins with a bird flying overhead. Even though it's only a small thing, the bird appearing in this opening does have some significance.
Happened in episode 1 and happened at the start of season 4, I guess.
As it directly relates to Mikasa's narration. In this narration, she comments on how people seem to think Eren has changed, but in reality, it's possible that he's been the same person ever since the beginning. The reason this relates to the bird is because in Eren's mind, the walls were nothing more than a birdcage that took his freedom away, which is why he hated the Titans even before his mother was eaten. Years later, when he finally escaped the birdcage and ventured outside, he realized that he still wasn't free since their enemy...
The thing is, this is just my theory, I'm enemy only, so you can correct me when the entirety is finished, but what I think is that the first Attack Titan possessor, which was not Ymir, had this kind of freedom in his heart, and he just transfers it to the next Attack Titan user, and I think this is how Eren ended up with that mindset, and it just even got transferred before he got the Attack on Titan, the Attack Titan's power, because it can travel through future and time and shit like that. Kind of complicated. It's weird, but yeah.
Cage, restricting his freedom once again. Therefore, by doing the rumbling, this is his one chance to become truly free for the first time, and it's why you could argue that his core motivations have never changed. The scene then flashes back to a year earlier when the scouts were heading towards Mali by ship, and for a bit of context, I'm going to quickly explain what's happening. During the time skip between seasons 3 and 4, the scouts were actively looking for alternatives to the rumbling, because they didn't want to rely on it for their survival. Relying on the rumbling would mean that Historia and her descendants would need to become royal-blooded Titans, and to avoid that outcome, Hanji suggested they should travel to Mali. By going through with this, they could learn a lot more about the enemy and hopefully find a solution, and that's why episode 28 follows directly on from this. Because this is their first time leaving the island, they've literally never seen things like clowns or ice cream or cars.
Bro, that scene with Levi, man. The dude literally thought Levi was a kid because he was so short, man.
Started waving at it like it was some kind of farm animal. While most of the group was visibly excited to be here, from the start of the episode, Eren had a depressed look on his face, and often looked like he was in deep thought about something. The main reason his mood was so terrible compared to everyone else was because he's realizing that all these people and everything around them will one day be wiped out because of him. Back when he kissed Historia's hand, he saw future memories of his full-scale rumbling, but for a few
this was exactly the moment where everything turned in his head, man.
years, he let himself believe that this future might be avoidable. Eren had initially hoped that freedom could be achieved a different way, but after trying and failing, at this point he was 90% certain that the memories he saw were going to happen. That's why he consistently had this vacant expression, since he was processing the reality that he had no other option but to destroy everything he's currently looking at. It's interesting when we contrast Eren's gloomy expression with Armin's excitement, because from a young age they both had this dream to see what was out there, but only one of them is burdened with this knowledge of the future. Now, before we move on, I thought it was worth mentioning the significance of Eren and Mikasa's early interactions. On 2 separate occasions, he was in a complete trance thinking about the terrible things that he's going to do, and both times Mikasa shows up to break him out of that thought process. In my opinion, this was foreshadowing for later in the episode, when Mikasa had the chance to break him away from the reality where he does the rumbling. In this one moment, Eren was willing to go down a completely different path, but it all depended on how Mikasa responded to his question. Later in the video, I'll explain exactly why this was the case, but for now, I just wanted to highlight these early interactions, which were subtly laying the foundations for what was to come. Anyway, soon afterwards, Levi gets pickpocketed by a young refugee, who tries to steal his bag of coins. If this boy's face looks familiar to you, it's likely because he appeared very briefly in episode 19, during the many visions that Eren saw as he entered the past dimension.
What?
In this flashback, Levi grabs his hand to stop him running away with the money,
I
and
didn't
the
notice
local
that.
Malians in the area start to surround them. Given that Malians aren't exactly the most tolerant people, they start berating Ramsey not just for being a thief, but also because he's an immigrant from another country. This is evidenced by the fact that they start to discuss the various cruel ways that they'll punish him, including throwing him into the sea or smashing off his hand. It goes without saying that these type of brutal punishments are things they never considered doing if it was a fellow Malian that was caught stealing, but because Ramsey is an immigrant, they view him as less than themselves, in a similar way to how they view Eldians. One of the people in the crowd
We are all
mentions
racist,
how
man.
Ramsey might be a subject of Ymir, which gets a reaction out of Sasha and a few other scouts. Seeing the cruel way the boy would be treated, Levi picks him up and makes up a flimsy excuse about how the refugee didn't technically steal anything because the money belongs to his older sister, who is apparently Sasha. Although nobody believed that excuse, it at least gave the group some time to run away, and eventually they managed to escape from the mob that was surrounding them. By the time they arrived in the secluded area, everyone was exhausted, but sitting on top of these ruins was Ramsey, who'd stolen the money for the second time today. As he cried tears of happiness, the captain decides to let it go, since that money was just given to him by the Azumabito. The scene ends with Eren staring in Ramsey's direction with a blank expression on his face, and not for the first time, Mikasa realizes that something isn't quite right with him. Moving on, the group then arrives at Hizru's estate, and Kiyomi explains to them about the improvements in blood testing tech. We already knew from Kruger's backstory that blood tests were used to determine if people were subjects of Ymir, and Kiyomi reveals that this tech has gotten even better, making it easier to find Eldians who've escaped from the internment zones. The reason the ambassador was telling them this was
Damn, it's basically like the Jew hunts, man.
to make it clear how difficult it will be for parodies to form any sort
Just
of
like
friendly
real history,
relations
man.
with other nations, because their people are being systematically discriminated against all over the planet. Despite that, Armin and Hanji were still willing to work to find this peaceful solution, since Historia's future depends on them finding this alternative. The commander goes on to explain that the next day there's a political forum in which an association called the Subjects of Ymir Protection Group will be giving a speech. Judging from their title, it sounded like they might be willing to cooperate with Paradis, but at this stage of the episode, the scouts didn't know what the group actually believed. The plan was to listen into their speech, and if they sounded friendly, then the island would try to make contact and let this group know that their intention is to make peace. This was pretty much their final hope at finding a diplomatic solution, because if they couldn't make allies with this association, then the chance of them making allies with anyone else is virtually non-existent. After that, Mikasa notices that Eren left while Kiyomi was talking, and after everyone goes to look for him, she finds him by himself outside this refugee camp. Although she didn't see it, he was crying before she arrived, and this is proof that right now Eren is mentally at his lowest point and is questioning whether the rumbling is something he wants to do. Remember, when he spoke to Reiner earlier this season, he revealed that he used to think everyone in Mali was an enemy, but it was once he crossed the sea that he realized that they were all the same. While there are bad people
that was nice foreshadowing, like they do it all the time.
Who discriminate against Eldians, there are also good people here too who don't deserve to be trampled.
Yeah.
This is something Eren only understood once he got here, and it's why, for this one single moment, he was willing to abandon everything and run away with Mikasa. As she approaches him, he goes on to explain that these refugees are similar to the Eldians in that one day their regular lives were taken away from them, and now they have no freedom. Following a brief pause, Eren turns to Mikasa and asks her why she cares so much about him. From the very first episode, it's been obvious that she loves him in a couple different ways. She loves him in the sense that it's her responsibility to keep him safe, almost like a parent, but at the same time, she does love him in a romantic way as well.
Really? Didn't she say it was family or something like that?
This has been demonstrated on many separate occasions, some more obvious than others, but for the most part, Eren has rarely demonstrated any romantic feelings back. That's not to say he doesn't have these feelings, but rather he's terrible at showing it, and up until this point he's treated her more like a sister than a potential girlfriend.
Yeah.
In this sequence though, he asks her the question because he wants to see if she'll reveal how she feels about him, and in his mind, if she admitted her love, then he was willing to abandon everything. Rumbling all these innocent people is something that he wasn't 100% ready
Like, was this his theory? from a YouTuber one, or did he say it in the manga? But because I didn't hear it in the anime.
To do yet, and he preferred to spend his remaining 4 years with Mikasa, regardless of what happens to the island. However, when it came down to it, she was afraid to tell him how she really feels, and if you've ever been in a remotely similar situation, then you can empathize with why she didn't tell him the truth. Keep in mind that in this scene, both of them are still teenagers, and so confessing your feelings is embarrassing, is risky in case the other person doesn't feel the same way, and she was kind of happy with the way their relationship already was. For a decade they've been best friends, so to add romance to that equation will have unknown consequences.
That's a bad zone.
Because it didn't have that long to think, she played the same
You are family.
Told him that she
that killed me, man.
As an audience, we can tell this wasn't her true feelings, as she was visibly blushing while staring into his eyes, but at the end of the day, she just wasn't ready to say how she felt. For that reason, she couldn't give Eren the way out that he was looking for, and from this moment onwards, the future he saw became set in stone. The rest of the scouts then arrive as Ramsey's grandfather invites them inside the tent, and throughout the night they have a pretty great time drinking together, having fun, and eventually passing out. These festivities were the one time Eren had a smile on his face, as it was the last night he spent with his friends before abandoning them to go undercover in Mali. As a side note, in episode 27, John himself had a flashback to this same night, when he realized that it was impossible to save these refugees from the rumbling.
What?
The next day, the scouts attend the speech from that pro-Eldian political group.
This foreshadowing is legendary.
Some kind of alliance, but as the speech continues, they quickly realize that that's not going to happen. To put it simply, this organization is seeking to defend the rights of displaced Eldians all around the globe, with an example being people like Annie's dad, who were taken away from their home countries. His argument is that these refugees have nothing to do with the Eldian Empire and shouldn't be punished for those crimes, as it's the devils on the island who the world should hate. Following this logic, there was no hope of the scouts ever coming to an agreement with this type of group, and as a result, this was the day that Eren walked away from them. Despite Hanji's best efforts, there was
this was basically the last hope, man. He
to defend Paradis, and so Eren left behind letters for his friends, telling them that he was trusting everything to Zeke. As we now know, he was only pretending to follow Zeke so that he could rumble the entire planet instead, but he wasn't going to put that in a letter for obvious reasons. The next time Mikasa saw him was during the attack on Liberia after he massacred tons of innocent civilians, and this helps to give context to why she was so upset when she finally saw him again. In the narration, present-day Mikasa wonders if all these things were destined to happen from the start, or if things might have turned out differently if she'd chosen another answer on the day that Eren asked her the
I don't think so. I think he would still did the same thing. He would still do the same thing, man.
The episode then moves on to Eren's perspective in the clouds, as his massive founding titan continues to charge ahead. During his narration, he begins to wonder where this story started, as it's possible it began with the dream he had under that tree in Shiganshina, or maybe it began...
Yeah, this is the exact moment with my theory where he has received Attack Titan information in his head in form of a dream. Like
2,000 years ago, when one of these
it was truly changed,
eventually leading to Ymir becoming the first
his Sigma grindset.
Alternatively, the story might have begun when he was born, or as he said in a previous episode, maybe Grisha is the one who started everything. However, in the narration, he comes to accept that it doesn't matter where this all began, because the fact is the story isn't even over yet. Even at this late stage, all the characters have some kind of future waiting for them ahead, regardless of whether it's good or bad, and this narration is Eren acknowledging that there's more they have to go through before they reach the end point. Things then flash back nearly a year ago, when Yelena first told him about Zeke's euthanization plan. Flock is the one who enabled this meeting to happen, which is why he was listening in, and she goes on to explain that the tainted wine was consumed by high-ranking...
What I didn't understand is that Eren really trusted Flock that much, man. I don't know.
This is how Flock knew all about the wine well before anyone else, and he was able to use that to their advantage when the Jaegerists made their move to take over. Sometime after this, the two scouts then had a meeting of their own, in which Eren told him how they should pretend to follow Zeke's plan. Flock was initially confused about what pretending to follow the plan would achieve, and this is when we switch over to a different flashback, which partially answers the question. In this other flashback, we see Eren talking to Historia before the scouts leave to visit Mali, and he warns her that the military police are planning to turn her into a Titan. To be specific, the MPs wanted to make sure that she eats Zeke as soon as he steps on the island, and Historia was more than willing to go along with that plan as long as it remained necessary for the island's survival. For Eren though, he wasn't prepared for her to make this sacrifice, and so he was willing to pretend to follow Zeke's plan, because it might lead to a future where she and the rest of his friends can live full lives. This is when the scene switches back to Flock, and it shows us the moment when Eren spells out his plan for global genocide. By betraying Zeke, this massacre will become possible, and it's interesting to take a look at Eren's facial expression as he says this. During this moment, he clearly has a lot of anger and conviction in his
I don't know is he really serious with that? Maybe he's trying something else, like, we don't know.
How he felt when he physically arrived in Mali and saw the things that he'd actually be destroying. Moving back to Historia, after telling her his intention to do the rumbling, she begins to freak out, but despite her hesitation, he's ultimately able to convince her to stay quiet about the whole thing. Eren needs Historia's cooperation for his rumbling plan to work, because if she didn't help him, then Zeke would have been eaten as soon as he got to the island. It was specifically because she volunteered to get pregnant that the Jaegers had the time they needed to overthrow the existing government. But the question then becomes, why would she do this? In one sense, Eren and Historia are very similar people in that they were both willing to sacrifice the world for someone they care about. In Season 3, Historia had the chance to eat Eren and inherit the Founding Titan, and she was told that by doing this she'd have the power to save humanity from the Pure Titans. Eren believed this was true as well, which is why he asked her to kill him, but in the end she rejected that power and saved his life, even though it meant that humans in the walls might be wiped out by the Titans. In the present day, Eren is now essentially repaying the favor by sacrificing humanity itself so that Historia can survive, but it was only possible because of her cooperation. The episode flashes forward to the Jaeger brothers' conversation in Mali, and this is the third time we've seen this conversation, but every time we do see it, we learn something new. This time around, Zeke is playing catch by himself while teasing his younger brother, as he confirms that Mikasa's love for Eren is out of her own free will and not because of any Ackerman DNA. For whatever reason, Eren theorized that her desire to protect him was somehow related to him awakening her power, but as it turns out, that has nothing to do with it. And
yeah, that's what you thought all the time.
Headaches she gets are completely unrelated. In spite of that, Eren still went back to the island and told Mikasa a bunch of lies, because in his mind, it was better for her to stay away from him and live a full life than for her to be involved in his rumbling plan.
Yes, because he's gonna die anyway in a few years.
Flashback, as Eren can be seen in the trenches in the Middle East. By this point, he had infiltrated the Malian army and was among the soldiers who were sent to fight the Mid-East Alliance. And in this scene, he demonstrates just how strong his conviction really is. With no choice left but to follow this path, he agonizingly saws off his own leg with a knife so that his war injuries seem more realistic. Without these injuries, he likely wouldn't have been allowed to stay at this hospital in Mali, so it had to be done if he was going to follow through with this. After sawing off his leg, he then plunges a bullet into his left eye, partially blinding himself in the process. And honestly, I'm not sure which of these is worse. If I had to choose, I think I'd go with the leg sawing option, just because I don't think I could do this even if the world depended on it. But at the same time, it is a quicker option. Anyhow, the flashbacks
I would just do the leg thing, man.
By some of the merchants, but admittedly, it's hard to tell what's happening here without looking at the manga panel of this exact same moment. Over the narration, Eren then reiterates to Zeke how he wants his friends to live happy lives, as the anime shows us this final flashback in which the scouts had a meal together the night before they retook Walmaria. In this image, both Marlowe and Commander Erwin were killed by Zeke the next day, which makes it kinda ironic that this image appears on screen as Eren is telling his brother how he wanted them to live happy lives. Regardless, episode 28 finally returns to the present day immediately after this, as this massive fleet of warships from all around the globe has gathered to
best scene, man. The best
scene. These ships are the biggest and best that humanity has to offer, and due to the nature of the threat, a ton of countries have joined together to make this happen. As the steam from the Titans rapidly approaches, this guy gives the order to fire, and surprisingly, it seemed like these weapons were actually working.
Like, at first this was insane. They can casually kill some colossal Titans. These are not normal Titans, man.
The Titans was chopped to pieces by these cannons, as their body parts began sinking lower into the water. However, with barely any time to think, a new wave of Titans swims through the madness and was heading straight towards the ships. The fundamental issue here is that even if every one of these cannons was guaranteed to kill a Titan, the fact is that there were thousands, if not millions of them within the walls, so humanity is simply way too outnumbered in this situation. One of the best sequences of the episode came straight after this, with the Titans quickly swimming underneath the ships, and as they did that, the steam juice was so intense.
Yeah, he got completely disintegrated, man. This was insane.
It literally melted the people on board. The force then caused these warships to be catapulted into the air, in a scene that was reminiscent of Armin's colossal attack on Liberia. This time though, the amount of ships destroyed was on a much larger scale, and as they exploded into the ocean, it created a sort of light show for everyone watching on the shore. Most of the soldiers then abandoned their positions to run into the city, and as some of them turn around, they get to see Eren's enormous bony shifter emerging from the smoke.
Damn.
This imagery of him leading the rumbling was heavily foreshadowed during the opening for part 2, And in this scene, one soldier screams in horror, declaring that this is the attack titan. We then get a close-up of his new titan face, and generally speaking, it is similar to his regular shifter appearance, with the key difference being that he has lips where he didn't used to, and his hair is now significantly longer and less human looking. While EREN marches forward, he channels the anger he felt on the day his mother got eaten, because by dehumanizing the enemy, it makes it easier for him to kill them. Throughout this video, we've established that EREN knows that humans are all the same no matter which side of the wall he's on, so the reason he thinks back to this rage is because it's helping him to push forward and do what needs to be done. In that spirit, he mentions how he's going to wipe out every last one of them from the world, and this is a callback to when he said the same thing about the Titans after she died. Part 2 then ends with an aerial shot of the rumbling wiping out an entire city, and the final shot of this episode is one of a Titan stomping on the camera, which is identical to what we've seen in the opening for Part 2. Anyway people, that was my breakdown for the finale of Part 2 of the final season.
Damn.
I want to thank you all for sticking with me for these first 2 parts. I really appreciate all the comments week to week.
Yeah, go I can't speak. Go subscribe to Quirk. He does great videos, great content, and shit like that. Yeah, and I would also appreciate a sub and like. And yeah, that's actually it. I do gaming content, reaction stuff, like the typical standard stuff, I guess. Variety content, I guess. And yeah, thank you for watching. I see you next time. Wafer out.